Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland unveiled the federal government's economic update on Monday. It laid out almost $400 billion in federal spending. Ever since, reaction hasn't been exactly glowing, including here in Ontario, where Provincial Finance Minister Rod Phillips described it as a missed opportunity. With us for their insights, all in the nation's capital, we welcome, in Britannia Village, Kevin Page. He's the former parliamentary budget officer, currently CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. In Centretown, Angella MacEwen, senior Labour economist at CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees. In Orleans, or Orléans if you prefer, Aaron Wudrick, federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And finally, Marieke Walsh, political reporter for the Globe and Mail, who's in her newsroom in downtown Ottawa. And it's great to be with you all tonight on TVO. Kevin, you were the numbers guy on Parliament Hill when you were the parliamentary budget officer, so I want to start with you. Start by just pick whatever two numbers you like from the other day and tell us why you think they are perhaps the most important numbers for our viewers and listeners to better understand.
Well, that's a good question, Steve. So, there's a lot of numbers. There's 250 pages in the document. There's numbers pretty much on every page. I think maybe one number I would say I would go just to the economy, to GDP. The estimated decline in GDP in 2020 is now at 5.8%. That's that's a record level of decline in output. Since the Great Depression. I think behind that number, of course, is a lot of hardship with respect to various sectors of the economy that are still pretty much in lockdown, and again, a level of employment that is still some 650,000 or so less than what it was in February before we went into the lockdown because of the virus. I think another number, Steve, might be, well, we have to pick a fiscal number. It would probably be the debt. I think, as a percentage of GDP now, we're seeing federal debt, which is kind of gross liabilities, less financial, non-financial assets, now in the range of 50% of our gross domestic product. It's an enormous historic increase in debt in 1 year. And that, of course, was symbolic of the fact that the government thought it was absolutely needed to backstop the economy. So two numbers, GDP and federal debt.
Good. Here is how Chrystia Freeland, the federal finance minister, justifies the record level of spending that includes all of those numbers that we just heard from Kevin Page. So Sheldon, let's hear that, please.
This is the most severe challenge our country has faced since the Second World War. It is our most severe economic shock since the Great Depression, and our most severe public health crisis since the Spanish flu a century ago. Canadians should know that their federal government will be there to help them get through it, come what may.
Aaron Wudrick, that is the explanation behind the record spending. Do you think it justifies it all?
I don't know if it justifies it all. I don't think anybody disputes that this is obviously a very unique situation. We're going to have to spend a lot of money. There was no getting around that. But I think it's dangerous to just assume that every dollar that they send out the door is justified. I mean, just to take one example, we learned this morning that in the third quarter of this year, household incomes dropped by $15 billion, which is a lot. But at the same time, government transfers to households increased by $100 billion. So effectively, the government has replaced every dollar of lost income with $7 in borrowed money. And I don't think that there's anyone that would have a problem with trying to replace every dollar with a dollar. But I think it's fair to question whether the programming they have right now is targeted well if you're sending $7 out the door to replace every dollar that's been lost.
Angela, fair point.
I do think it matters how you spend the money. It's not just how much money you spend, it's how it's spent and is it well targeted. For example, the wage subsidy, they've had a lot of problems trying to design that in a way that is actually well targeted. And they keep changing the parameters of the program a little bit. So the CERB, that money goes directly to people that have lost income because of COVID, because they're not working. But the wage subsidy, that goes to everybody at the business, whether or not they were going to be laid off. So that's not as well targeted. Is it justified? Is it helping businesses stay afloat? And so maybe the household replacing the dollar isn't the best comparator for the wage subsidy. But yes, I think we need to have some oversight. We need to have thoughtful interventions. And the size is not the only thing that we should be looking at. We should be looking at how well it's being spent.
Okay, more on that in a bit. Marieke Walsh, I did want to ask you, because you spoke to the Ontario Finance Minister, Rod Phillips, before the statement was given. What was he looking for in the statement?
The key thing he was looking for is something that was not ultimately in it, and that is an increase or the signal of a possible increase to the Canada Health Transfer. As you well know, there are some serious challenges over the long term to the structural funding for Ontario's healthcare system. And Doug Ford's government wants to see Ottawa pitching in more money. Right now, the feds pitch in about 22% of all dollars to the healthcare system. And the Ontario Premier, the Ontario government, as well as provinces across the country want to see that hit above 30%. And so that's going to be discussed in the meeting next week with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. But certainly it was made very clear to reporters in Ottawa that that has so far not been budgeted for or accounted for in what we saw this week.
Kevin, I wonder if I could get you to weigh in on that, in as much as Rod Phillips called it a missed opportunity to do something big and important on healthcare. Would you share his characterization of that?
Well, I think it's still premature, like to make that point. I think again we're still months away from a budget. I think the budget, well, with the vaccine that is out and being distributed, a budget in March, we're really kind of look at how will we not only stimulate the economy, the post-COVID economy, but how are we going to deal with some of those structural changes, around climate change, around healthcare, around inclusion. So I think like to look for a fiscal update and say we need a big signal. It might be a little bit premature. I think there's a lot of literature in that budget that speaks to just the heavy, load that the federal government has carried during, the COVID-19 lockdown. There's numbers in there. Another number that kind of speaks to, out of really every dollar spent, is pretty much the feds have been kicking in 80 cents, in terms of total, government, federal, provincial, territorial government spending in terms of COVID support. So I'd say we better wait to the budget before we really talk about the future of healthcare spending.
Right, and just to be clear, this was a sort of economic and fiscal update as opposed to a budget, although there were some, quasi-budgetary items in here, which we'll talk about in a second. But Kevin, let me do a follow-up with you. Did you share Aaron's concern that, X number of dollars were being lost, but by his math, 7 times X was going out the door, and he wasn't clear that it was all going to relevant or useful things?
Well, I think Aaron's asking good questions. Is it possible that we got the size wrong on this, on the fiscal support package, that it's actually too generous? I think when you look internationally, it's clear that Canada had probably the biggest fiscal support package relative to the economy in advanced economies, in the OECD economies. I don't think really anybody's overspent us. So like it's a fair point. There's different ways to look at these numbers. I think like you could look at the income numbers and the transfers and just the people's reactions to savings. You can also look to these massive declines in output. They're both pretty significant. I think some of this will sort itself out. There's some positive upside surprises potentially. Like a lot of people are saving some of this money that we might see some higher spending. And, in 2021, and the minister talks about, the reduction of scarring, that maybe we'll have less scarring because we spent a lot of money up front.
Angela, let me follow up on these items that kind of appear budgetary, even though this is not technically a budget. And for example, retrofitting homes. They're going to spend money helping people to subsidize the expenditures around retrofitting homes, making them greener and so on. What do we think of this initiative?
So I think that homes need to be retrofit. I think that this will probably more likely benefit wealthier people, and it will not benefit those who need it. So it's not well targeted for the moment. It's not well targeted for climate change. I don't think it's necessarily the best bang for our dollar. Here we have people who rent who are getting evicted, and who we have increasing food insecurity. And so this certainly wouldn't be my priority for public spending. I don't think that we're in a situation where the federal debt is so cheap. It's 1% interest. So we're asking the federal government to borrow at 1% and to spend it in a targeted way that keeps the economy going, so that renters can keep paying rent and can keep buying food. And instead of having those renters have to take out payday loans or put money on their credit card and pay 19% interest on that debt. So
No, I get. Hold on though, but that's a separate
yeah.
point. I'm going to get to that later about how cheap it is to borrow money. I just want to really focus on this program here. Aaron, what's your view on this retrofitting program?
Yeah, I agree with Angela a lot, and we agree more than you think, actually, sometimes, Steve. But it's look, this is an issue that is climate change is a longstanding issue. It's a priority issue, but it's not related to the pandemic. And this is what I was talking about when I talk about not questioning any of the spending. There's no question some of the spending right now is necessary. I don't think anyone's going to dispute things like spending on healthcare, on PPE. But is retrofitting homes right now, when you're facing a situation where the deficit has just grown 20-fold in a year, is spending money retrofitting homes, especially for wealthy individuals, is that the highest priority for spending? I don't think it is.
Okay. Marieke, I want to get you to focus, if you would, on the taxing multinational digital giants. This is sort of the Netflix, Amazon Prime, all that business. You know, this was something I do remember Stephen Harper well campaigning, saying there will be no Netflix tax if the Conservatives are reelected. They weren't reelected. What are the politics around putting a tax on something that hasn't been taxed heretofore?
The politics around it are a fewfold. We got to remember that we're in a minority government, so this government needs to get the support of the NDP, for example, who have been long championing more taxes on these multinationals for the revenues that they make in Canada. This tax is on consumers, so we will now be paying, or when it's implemented, we'll be paying consumer GST, HST on these Netflix subscriptions and other subscriptions. The NDP argument for this is that it levels the playing field, because then when a local company is selling this, they still have to charge consumer taxes. And until now, international conglomerates have not had to. And so that's the leveling of the playing field that they're talking about between domestic companies and international companies. The question is whether this goes far enough to get the support from the NDP. The NDP say they also want to see corporate taxes on the revenues that these companies make from Canada. And so, you know, there is going to be, I think, still some bartering on this plan.
Kevin Page, can I get you to weigh in on the advisability of this new tax?
Yeah, so I think that the taxation of digital companies, the taxation of wealthier people, these are going to be big issues that we're just going to live with over the next 10 years. You know, the economy is becoming more digital. We're going to have to find ways to tax. A lot of, you know, public concerns around just, you know, through the COVID period, there are a number of companies that brought in making huge amounts of monies. And so, you know, should they contribute to the, you know, the common good, basically helping people while we're dealing with the pandemic. So, but I think fiscally, again, back to the numbers, if you look at the amount of monies we're going to revenue with some of these tax measures, or rather they're going to contribute to kind of deficit reduction, it's not even a drop in the bucket. We're talking about, you know, a billion or a billion roughly a year, when we're dealing with a deficit of $380 billion, dropping to maybe something in the $130 to $150 billion range next year. And we're talking about increasing taxes by $1 billion. So, I mean, the real discussion is being punted. We're going to have to raise revenues in a more significant way, but it ain't going to happen in the next couple of years.
But this, Aaron, is one of those shiny baubles that people do tend to look at and say, okay, I'm getting taxed for something now that I didn't have to pay tax on before. Yes, it levels the playing field for Canadian businesses, but what's your view on it?
Yeah, it levels it by making consumers pay more. And remember, you heard Justin Trudeau and his finance minister come out saying the last thing Canadians need right now is higher costs. And that's what this does. And I completely understand no one's shedding any tears for Jeff Bezos or the Weston family. They're doing great. They've got billions. But the problem is, first of all, even if you can get them to pay, as Kevin said, it's nowhere near enough. You're not going to, if you raise $6 or $7 billion on a $400 billion deficit, you're really not making any headway. And secondly, they're not even paying it. They're just passing it on. I mean, Netflix and Amazon are being enlisted, like every other business, to collect taxes from Canadian consumers. So you're not really getting big tech here. You're just making consumers pay a tax that essentially they were supposed to be paying all along.
Okay, let's put two expressions on the table here, and we'll get some discussion on this that our viewers and listeners may not have heard before. We heard Minister Freeland talk about fiscal anchors and fiscal guardrails. Kevin Page, why don't you start us off on this? What do those things mean?
Yeah, so fiscal anchors is a term that has become popular really since the 2008 global financial crisis, where a lot of companies, a lot of countries experienced big increases in debt. So again, what is a prudent level of debt for a country? Are there sort of levels of debt for some countries who are going to have difficulties borrowing, or they're going to see downgrades with respect to their bond rating. So, I mean, it's a prudent level of debt. Again, we can see in this fiscal update, the government in its medium-term forecast is now talking about debt to GDP numbers in the 55% range. Again, in 2019, it was sitting at 31%. If you go further back in the 1990s, federal debt was probably, north of 60, it was in this about 65, 66%. So what is the, fiscal anchors, like, is there a medium-term debt target that we should be moving towards? And then fiscal guardrails is really, some people call them fiscal guardrails or rules. How do we make sure that the government is actually moving in that direction to that appropriate debt target? Guardrails is being used in this document more around shaping the stimulus. And the minister has signaled that she wants to use labor market indicators, which I think is a very novel idea. I'm sure Angela would want to pipe in on this. And it's actually possible that if we have a speedy recovery, and Aaron will like this, if we have a speedy recovery and we get back to employment levels or working hour levels or unemployment levels that we saw pre-COVID, we don't need stimulus. Because the government can basically, if we use those guardrails appropriately, it could actually say that stimulus is really not necessary because the economy is functioning just fine.
Okay, Angela, pipe in.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I do think it's important to note that we saw the biggest drop in the labor market since the Great Depression. We saw levels of unemployment where a third of working Canadians were out of work. And that's huge. And we have students that are graduating into this labor market with huge amounts of debt, and they're getting the interest on that put off for a year. There will be long-term wage scarring effects for those students who are graduating right now, for the people who were laid off and haven't been able to get back to work for the past 6 months. So I expect that we will need stimulus for some time. The International Monetary Fund is saying, the chief economist there is saying she thinks we're in a global liquidity trap, which means that monetary policy can't do anything. And to stimulate the economy, we're going to need federal governments like ours to step up and keep funding to get us past the edge of this crisis, and to keep going once the public health crisis is over, because there will be scarring effects from this extended shutdown. You're going to have businesses that have gone bankrupt through no fault of their own. There's nothing they could have done to plan or prepare for this, and workers like in the airlines. So there are going to be long-term effects in very specific industries. And so I think it's really good that they talked about fiscal guardrails. I think it's really good that they talked about the labor market effects, because that's really where we should be watching. That's what we want to make sure that people are able to make ends meet, that there's a broad recovery. We saw a really long, drawn-out recovery from the 2008 crisis, and that's partly because we bailed out the banks and we didn't bail out people. Hopefully we learn from that, and we're taking a different approach this time.
Okay, Marieke, maybe pick up the story there. To the extent that I've heard criticism about this financial and economic statement, it's that there wasn't a lot of specificity around when the fiscal guardrails and anchors, et cetera, when they actually kick in. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was virtually no specificity on that, and also how they will define those guardrails. Does it need to be 2019 or 2018 economic numbers before unemployment on hours worked before they remove that stimulus? None of those things have been spelled out. The finance minister said that would come in the months ahead when they also release their stimulus plan, which also has very few details and is not actually yet added to the budget's bottom line. And so that's really going to be something that we see, I think, around the next budget in the spring. And I think also questions around when a vaccine comes are going to guide the timing of these next steps, because even the finance minister, the opposition is saying this very clearly, but the finance minister also acknowledged this week that having a vaccine is what allows this economy to reopen in a more meaningful way.
Sure. Aaron, I wonder if I could get you now to pick up the story on the issue actually that Angela brought up a few moments ago, which is, money's just dirt cheap right now for the government of Canada to borrow. And if you need to stimulate the economy and if you need to protect people from the worst ravages economically since the Great Depression, you can't do it much better than when you're borrowing money at 1%. In which case, isn't this the time to go deeply into debt if you have to go deeply into debt?
Well, there's that if you have to go deeply into debt right now. I totally agree that the economy is going to need some help. I think that the fact that so much of that money, remember the 7 going out the door for the every dollar, a lot of that money is being banked, and there's a reason a lot of people who have banked it can't spend it. They can't travel, they can't do the things they want to do. So it's very possible, as Kevin said, that we may not need some of that stimulus, and that's why I love the idea of guardrails. I just like to know what they are. And I'm hoping that we will get that in the spring. And my fear is the reason that they haven't told us what they are is that they're going to set them up in such a way that it will justify whatever stimulus they want to spend. And the reason I think that is they've already announced they intend to stimulate without even knowing, on what basis or when they want to do it. And I find that very curious. Usually you shape a policy around saying, we want to do this, and then we find the money to do it. You don't say, we're going to spend X, and then we're going to find things to spend it on. So to your question about the price of debt, look, obviously it's better interest rates are low. It's the only reason we're not in a crisis already. But I think just assuming that they're going to stay low forever, and remember, a lot of the debt we're taking on is not long-term. A lot of it is 5-year bonds, not 30-year. They're changing that now. But it's a bit like saying I went to the casino and I had a really lucky night, so I'm just going to assume that every night is going to go the same way it did last night.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about one of the real big-ticket items that came out of yesterday. And the commitment to spend billions and billions isn't quite there yet. It's still in the let's see what we can do phase. Here's Chrystia Freeland on childcare. Sheldon, roll it if you would.
I say this both as a working mother and as a finance minister. Canada will not be truly competitive until all Canadian women have access to the affordable childcare we need to support our participation in our country's workforce.
Kevin Page, everybody's saying this. Everybody is saying that if there's anything good going to come out of this COVID-19 pandemic, it's that finally governments are going to get serious about putting a national childcare program in place. However, the fine print always says childcare is a provincial responsibility. We've tried going down this road so many times in the past and haven't quite got there. What makes anybody think this time is going to be different? Let's start off with you, Kevin, on this one.
Again, you're asking really tough questions, Steve. So this is, I would say on this, that I think there's a sense, in the context of COVID-19 that there's a possibility of doing, people use the word social resets or strategic resets. And then when you start to realize that, what has happened to us and, the impacts that Angela's talked about in big parts of the labor force. So, going forward, is there an opportunity to change? And with respect to the federal provincial aspects to the childcare discussion, I think the government is going to be very careful. Really, all they talked about in terms of funding this is to study it. Really tens of millions of dollars to study how could possibly we bring this about. But if we're really talking about a big program and it's going to need tens of billions of dollars across the country in order to create a Quebec-style program, then we're just going to have to be honest that we're going to have to raise taxes. And again, I think that's the conversation for childcare, but I think there's going to be other programs, basic income programs, potentially even some climate change type of infrastructure programs. Taxes probably will going to have to go up over the medium term as we get through the crisis.
Angela, I know Rome wasn't built in a day, but I suspect there are some people who were hoping that they'd see more than just the promise to create a secretariat to look into how to doing this. Were you disappointed with this part of the announcement?
Absolutely. All of the narratives leading up to the speech and the speech itself indicated that the government was ready to take this seriously. We have in Ontario, about a third of childcare centers have closed because of the increased expenses of delivering care in a pandemic. And mothers are talking about just staying home instead of going back to work. And so, especially if you have children under 6, there is action they could have taken to support existing childcare centers in staying open to deliver care right now, the way that they're delivering $1 billion to long-term care homes. So I was hoping to see something like that. I was glad to see some money around training. That's a lesson learned from Quebec and how Quebec implemented that they didn't have enough skilled workers. And so to get started on the training, I think is a good plan. But there's definitely going to be a lot of skepticism because this has been promised several times in my lifetime and it hasn't come to fruition. And I just want to say this is not a social reset. This is an economic reset. If we had childcare for all children, it would contribute $1 billion to the economy, which is as much as the stimulus that the federal government is. So this is stimulus, providing childcare, because those mothers can then go to work and then they pay taxes and spend money in their communities. And it creates jobs that were previously unpaid, that were not in the economy. So it creates jobs at childcare centers. And I really hope that we have a focus on making sure those are good jobs and that those workers are paid good wages.
No, I get the economics of this, but let me go to
Marieke.
Marieke.
But a lot of people miss it.
Okay, we've talked about that numerous times in this program, but I do, politics is the art of the possible, and I want Marieke to jump in here now and talk to us about the fact that I guess it was maybe 15 years ago when Ken Dryden was the cabinet minister in charge of this in Paul Martin's government, that they did sign national child care agreements with all the provinces. Then Stephen Harper's government came in, canceled them, and now, here we are 15 years later and everything old is new again. What's possible on this file this time?
So I think what's really interesting to watch is how much Chrystia Freeland has staked her own personal interest and priorities on that. I think that the fact that the finance minister has made this such a big issue in terms of her priorities elevates the expectations that this actually does get done, and also elevates the political risks for the Liberals if they don't get it done. I think that people in the fall, when they first saw this again in the throne speech, there was skepticism, as Angela said. I think there still is skepticism, but that skepticism is now being matched with these very decisive comments from Chrystia Freeland about how much of a priority it is and how she wants to, quote, get it done, and now is the time. And so she has really raised the expectations, and I think that we should expect to see something in the spring budget that at least starts to try and meet those expectations, rather than just simply this 5-year panel planning ahead on it.
Aaron, about a minute and a half to go. What's your take on it?
Well, I'm a father of 3. My wife and I have put 3 kids through daycare, so we're fully aware of the cost. But I feel like sometimes, Steve, in this country, when we have an issue that's really important, people forget that some things are things that the federal government's responsible and some are provincial responsibilities. And daycare is pretty clearly a provincial responsibility. If a province wants to do one of these programs like in Quebec, they're fully free to do. And the reason that they haven't is it's very expensive. And so, I appreciate that it's an important issue. Again, I personally experienced the cost of this, and it is a substantial cost. But I don't think we can just set aside, whose responsibility it is just because of the importance of the issue. And I think this is one example of a permanent program that's substantial cost that we're going to have a conversation about going forward, because it is going to have to mean, as Kevin said, higher taxes. People love stuff if they think it's not going to cost anything. When you say they are going to have to pay for it themselves rather than, Jeff Bezos and the Westons, I think you get a more real feel for what they're willing to accept.
And Marieke, in our last 10 seconds, government's not going to fall over this statement, is it?
I mean, I highly doubt it. I don't think that any voter would be appreciative of being sent to the polls right now. So I don't see that happening. But you never know in Ottawa, Steve. So I won't rule it entirely out.
You never know. That is so true about politics. Kevin Page, Angella MacEwen, Aaron Wudrick, Marieke Walsh. Really good of all 4 of you to join us on TVO tonight. We should get this group back together again after the real budget comes out next year and weigh in then. Thanks so much, everybody, and stay safe out there, eh?
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.